IVM.
Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of Uncle Please Sit, Lockdown Edition. Hi Tushar.
Hi Joel. Co-host of this podcast.
Just decided to completely knock this entire co-host and those nonsense and just go right straight into it.
You were doing the intro and you just lost interest halfway. Okay, do this every time. If you're here, you know who we are.
Yeah. We are on episode 18, I think, right now, and episode 19. By now, my co-host and host is Tushar Abhichandani.
That's the state of this. We don't even know what episode this is anymore. This is what lockdown has done to us.
No, but here's the thing, right? We started this show in March.
Yeah.
Okay. We recorded the first 5 episodes very nicely in the studio in Bandra and with cool mics with that little mesh disc in front of your face. And now we are doing it. And since episode 6, I think, we've been sitting and recording it remotely.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So the show is basically this. Now it's a Zoom call show. It's not. This is its reality. Okay. Before we go any further, we'd like to introduce another very special guest on our show today, Nikhil Govius. He is an agriculture and energy researcher based in Patna. And he also manages a farmer producer organization in Bihar's Vaishali district. Hi, Nikhil. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joel. Hi, Tushar. Thanks for having me on. It's going well. Yeah.
Are you in Vaishali district right now?
No, I somehow managed to anticipate that there was going to be a national lockdown. So I got the last flight out of Patna and came back home.
Would you be able to do this if you were in Vaishali district?
There's very great 4G connection. I have a Jio SIM card with a 3 GB.
Never forget the power of Mr. Ambani.
Thank you for that, sir. And it's great because, you can download a movie or watch a movie every day in the night. And everyone there has Jio SIMs. And so, it's pretty good.
Wow.
It's still quite staggering, no? Even though we've gotten used to the idea, but it's still so insane that anywhere in any part of this country you have 4G now.
Yeah.
Come, Joel, tell us, what are we doing today?
Today, the reason why we have Nikhil on the show and the reason why I specified that Nikhil is from Vaishali district, Bihar, because we are going to be talking about rural India and more specifically our perceptions of them. So there's this idea, right, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, about how everyone talks about how villages are always better than cities. They're cleaner, they're everything is better there, the people are nicer, the environment is good.
The fresh air.
The fresh air and the fresh food and the fresh produce and so on and so forth. And compared to this dirty city, which is so degraded and corrupted, the village, even the people in villages are so happy and innocent and they sleep well at night and so on and so forth.
People's image of a city is a Madhur Bhandarkar film.
Yeah, and basically.
That film would be called City. Because all Madhur Bhandarkar films have highly imaginative names.
Right on the nose.
Yeah.
Let's make a film about traffic signals. What shall we call it?
Traffic signal.
Traffic signal.
I think that way Chandni Bar was quite revolutionary because he just didn't call it dance bar, he called it Chandni Bar.
Chandni Bar. So the thing is that this perspective is true to some extent, but it depends on who you are, right? So if you come from a privileged background, if you are an upper caste person or an upper class person, actually if you're in the rural environment, it's mostly caste. If you're an upper caste person, you will have a fairly nice time when you go home for the holidays. On the other hand, if you are anyone else, the village could be quite shit for you. And that's a perspective that we are going to be discussing with Nikhil today. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to discuss this.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. Some really fun guests on the network this week. Cyrus welcomed Dia Mirza to come and have a conversation about all kinds of different things. Danny Morrison was on Edges and Sledges, the cricket podcast. If you haven't heard that, that's always a fun listen. And Rahul Subramanian was on Football Should Fall to grow their ever more exciting list of guests. And it's not just that. Mantra Mugdha, old friend of ours, was on Advertising is Dead. Manu Pillai was on the Filter Coffee podcast. It's been one great guest after the other. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
And we are back to an all-new episode of Uncle Please Sit. With us is our guest, Nikhil Govius, who is an energy and agricultural researcher based out of Patna. We're talking about villages and cities and our perspectives and perceptions on them. Nikhil, what do you think of the premise of this podcast today? Do you think it has do you think it's true?
I think it's very true. It depends on where you're from and your location within the wider, network of identities that we have.
Okay.
And that sort of frames what you feel about a rural space or where you're from.
Okay. Before we start digging in, Nikhil, give us a little bit of intro to yourself, na?
Okay. So I was born in Bombay and I did an early part of my education there, and after which I think I misread a lot of marks and watched Hazaro Khwaishein Aisi and felt that I needed to go to the villages of India to do revolution.
Also, Chitrangana is very hot.
Yeah, but okay, ignore. Moving on.
Ruined his moment.
I was going to say how I wanted to have a Dear Geeta moment, and true fans of the movie will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So I went to Rajasthan. I worked for a year there with a FPO that was looking to work for the rights of farmers, landless laborers, as well as Tendu leaf pluckers. And this is my first experience of rural life. I'm born in Bombay, and the first thing I do is get on a train and get off at Kota and then take a 10-hour bus journey by Rajasthan State Transport to this village called Jiri. And that's where I stay for a year, and I get mentored there by a very, I still have a lot of regard for him, this gentleman called Mr. Devinder, who actually sort of eased me into, he was like, okay, you're a well-read kid, you've read all the books, and, so this is how you actually adjust with rural life. And, this is the first time I stay in a house that has gobar thatching, and and I'm like, oh, okay, fine, it's covered in poop, right? That's my first understanding of like gobar, is that this is poop. And I arrived during Diwali, right? So Diwali ka lepai karte hain, which is basically where you take fresh gobar, you put a lot of water in it, and you spread it out evenly on the floor and on the walls. It's a great insulator. It also sort of prevents a lot of pests and insects. And I'm like, and the kids there in the school that they ran were teaching me how to do it. And I'm like, I'm not putting my hands in this. And he's like, no, do it and smile and start laughing, and you realize. And then, so I put my hands in and realized that, oh man, this is warm. Okay, and I'm having this like gag reflex, and then I see these kids around me and they're doing it, and for them it's completely natural, and I'm like, okay, sure, I'm going to give this a shot. So life goes on. I learned a lot about rural India, about the village I'm living, about Rajasthan in particular. Overcome my language barriers. I'm from Bombay. I largely speak Marathi and English, and now I'm coming to terms with Haruti, which is their local language, and also Hindi. Right? I mean, most of us Bombay boys don't even speak Hindi properly. So I do all of that, thought I'd, want to do my civil services like every good patriotic Indian. So I went to India's #1 anti-national university to do my master's. I specialized in agricultural political economy. And then over the past 6 years, I've been working out of Bihar, trying to build a farmer-producer organization to ensure that farmers get better incomes as well as, access to improved scientific production techniques. So I have, I would say, a good, 10 years plus of work experience working across most states in India. That's Bihar, Maharashtra, Karnataka. So like all the way from the north, including Punjab and Haryana. So I'd say like a pan-Indian experience of working in India's countryside. And here I am today on this podcast with both of you all fine gentlemen to discuss some of these issues.
Yeah, all those 10 years led to this.
Yeah. It's a great achievement.
But so, the fact that, how hard was the adjustment?
So initially, it's you're excited. You're like, okay, I want to try this life. I want to try this simple life. I want to do all of these things. But the second day, I was like, okay, there's no toilet. I had to go with a lota. And so one thing, of course, and this again is back to my Bombay life, right? Did a very comfortable life. You have no idea how to use just one lota.
No.
Right? One lota bar of pani is not enough. And that was the first thought that ran through my mind. And then moving on, the fact that you don't have constant electricity, the fact that you don't have network coverage, the fact that there are mosquitoes all night, the fact that you want drinking water, you have to go to the hand pump, you want water for your kitchen, you have to go to the hand pump. A lot of these aspects that come into play here, which are like, okay, these are things I take for granted. Services, infrastructure I expect to have in my house, and these just aren't there. And, going on, I found, initially I was very excited. Yeah, there's no toilets and I'm going out in the open and it's such a great experience. Till I remember about 10 days into it where a couple of my students, I could see them walking and they see me and they turn around and they, just move away. And this instant shame came over me. And, I'm a man here, but for a lot of women and children, this is their everyday existence. You have to wake up before dawn, right? Go out into the fields in absolute darkness so you can complete your ablutions. And it's a very, very shameful activity. The fact that you cannot do this in the privacy of your own house. And there is no adjusting in a sense. And, this is something I'm constantly talking about in my work as well. Whenever I parachute into a site and we're talking to farmers, a lot of people, when they're interacting with villagers, wherever, if they get the opportunity to, there's always this, no, we are still somewhat equal. No, we are not equal. They will never be us and we will never be them. There are fundamental barriers. So adjusting, you can adjust as much as you can as a person, depends on your personality, but I guess there's no really adjusting to the lack of services, the lack of a whole range of amenities which we take for granted in our everyday lives, which make our life so much more easier. Right? Like the first question you asked me is, do you get 4G internet there?
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, yeah, of course you do. But just these small aspects which we take for granted, like, okay, of course I need to have broadband in my house. I need to have XYZ. I need to have 24-hour uninterrupted power supply. But that is not the lived realities for a large section of India's population that resides in these villages.
Yeah, because so when you went, okay, what were your when you went to the village, did you also romanticize the village experience?
Of course. So when I first went to GD, I was, supremely excited. The views were beautiful, and there's you woke up in the morning. There's this slight mist. All the chulas are burning, and there's this haze all over covering, all of the little houses, and it looks really beautiful. And you're like, wow, look at that farmer. He's going out in the morning, taking his cattle to graze, or he's going and he's doing some pruning of his plants or whatever. He's doing some work in the field. And this is such an idyllic, romantic space. And it's lovely, right? And then as you spend more time there, as you sort of dip your toes into their lived realities, you're like, wait, a lot of these things aren't right, right?
It's sort of like that initial phase where it's like, as you said initially, it almost sounds like your gaze was like, how the Western gaze is towards India when like a lot of journalists sort of parachute in, and a lot of not just journalists, people parachute in and have this approach like, oh, look at this idyllic, happy people.
Absolutely.
It does. So essentially, we also end up doing that to the rural area.
Absolutely. This Orientalist approach, right, is this divide, right, in terms of how do you actually view a village, and what do you feel are the inherent qualities of a village. So you have a lot of people writing in the 1920s, 30s about what they think, Gao kaisa ho, so you have someone like a Gandhi, Gao, India's heart resides in its villages.
Yeah.
And then you have someone on the polar opposite. You have Ambedkar, who has a lived reality of being a Dalit living in a village. And he's like, no, this is the worst, right?
Yeah.
We have to ensure that traditional social relations of the village get broken down, because these relations are meant to stifle and suffocate a large majority of the people who are just arbitrarily born lower caste. Yeah. So it's very interesting, and I think that entire same paradigm continues from the 30s till now, where we in the city who've like, you look at a village, you look at a green field when it's going past you on the train, on the highway, and you're like, so beautiful, right? But then if you delve a little more into the papers, or you read a little more, do some Googling, you find out that life in villages is pretty horrible. You read some of the autobiographies of people who are writing from, coming to village. Perubul Murugan, for instance,
Yeah.
is great Tamil writer. And it's like, wow, this is horrific, right? That people live this existence. And in this existence continues till today.
I have, so I grew up I am obviously not comparing myself to Mr. Murugan or anyone like that, but a small little example, okay? So I grew up in a place called Vasai, which is a town municipality now outside of Bombay. But where I grew up, it is still a village, okay? And forget the caste structures and the social structures and this and that, but even on the most basic level, it's so stifling. Like I was in college in Bombay, and I had long hair, okay? And immediately everyone in that, saying, having someone with long hair and referring to that person as a drug addict or whatever is a countrywide phenomenon. But ostracizing my family because one of the people had long hair was something that was unique to that village in Vasai. That kind of reaction. And there were all these little things, whenever I would hear people talking about the romance of villages, I'm like, listen, you obviously haven't been to one. You obviously have never been to one, because my brush with it only was so shitty. I cannot imagine how it is. I guess, based on our popular culture also, Nikhil, I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, but there are two perspectives to this, okay? There's one perspective, which is the DDLJ perspective, or the Jab We Met perspective, which is everyone's happy and shining and smiling and healthy and drinking lassi all the time. And there are all these fields everywhere and they're jumping on and off tractors, okay? And the world is a lovely place. Okay, and then there's the opposite of that, which is the NH10. Have you seen this movie, NH10?
Yeah.
NH10 or Patal Lok or Gangs of Wasseypur, or that kind of perspective where the village is, or rural India is this dark, fucked up place where people go to die. Basically.
There is actually a sort of a longer history to this. So these are slightly more recent examples. A lot of our village, this idyllic village, but also with its problem, a lot of our films from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a lot of our writers were, these progressive writer movements and all these.
Correct, yeah.
So a lot of them did show problems, but of course within the framework of mainstream cinema.
Yeah.
But because a lot of it was these progressive writers movements, their approach towards village was also very benevolent, in the sense that it was very, these are good people and they need help, and they are kind people. They are, and the rich man is evil, and the
industrialist,
the money lender. No, it started with the money lender. The industrialist came into
basically anyone who has capital.
So it also became this thing that, the villages are these lovely, somewhat poor, but although they're poor, but when
hearts of gold, brother.
But when they're not being exploited, they are not poor, they're okay, they're doing fine. But then somebody exploits them and they get screwed. So it's we've always set up the premise, even with the so-called progressive writers movement and all these other places. The premise has always been, village good, everything else bad. But for the problems of the village.
No, but that's what I'm saying. No, in sharp contrast to, for instance, earlier this year, I watched Patal Lok. Yeah. Okay, I don't know if you guys have seen it. Nikhil, I think you haven't watched it now, but no. It was unflinching and uncompromising as far as its view of rural India was concerned.
I think that's also happening because a lot of the people now, the stories, now we have access to stories, right? We didn't have access to a lot of these stories from subalterns and others, which were not even available earlier. Now you actually hear about them, or it's not just the upper caste perspective.
But Nikhil, tell me one thing. When you have, do you we were talking earlier about the difference in perspective of, say, a Gandhi and an Ambedkar, or a Gandhi and a Nehru, as far as villages were concerned, where Gandhi's idea of a village was something that was a place that was self-reliant, both as far as production of material was concerned and also as far as governance was concerned. Yeah. Okay, but I don't know if this is a popular misconception, if this is a popular opinion or not, but I think that empowering villages did more harm than good. Could you say that?
I think that's a very harsh assessment. I would always say that
no harm than good as far as these kind of social stratifications are concerned.
So I think any system of political power that hands power to the elites, and that could be in a city, that could be the state level, that could be the national level, at an international level, or even down to your local self-government, any sort of political system that hands power to the elites and concentrates that power, right? So you have economic, social capital that fuses itself into political power. These systems just sort of make it seem worse. But that being said, the democratic ideals, which is that people need to have the power to determine their own futures and determine that the power rests in the will of the majority, crudely defined, is still a very important ideal. Right? And it sort of mandates that individuals are equals amongst, the entire community. De jure equal rather than de facto equal. And I think these are very important ideals. But I think coming back to, Gandhi, Nehru, it's, and of course, in terms of what Tushar said about the progressive writers movement and the way they described rural India at that point of time in the 50s and the 60s, it also leads into this process of nation building, right? You're trying to make this argument about that, you have our farmer is the one along with our soldier and along with these various essential workers, let's say, who are feeding the country, who are doing all of this stuff. Yeah. There's this interesting story about how Nehru apparently cried when he sees Mother India in the theater, right? Because that scene where he's trying to plow the farm and the plow breaks, the ox dies, and his hands get stuck, right? And then he just leaves. The father leaves, if you remember the story. And that thing is really tragic. You're watching it and you're like, shit, this guy who, I'm just going out eating food, all this stuff, and this is what he has to go through to get to, make what I need. And it's a very visceral experience, and I think then it just disappears. 70s, 80s, 90s, it just disappears and it becomes comical. And now you have more interesting sort of subaltern perspectives of stories of rural. It's very interesting I would always never focus on the plot. I'm more focused on what is the architecture. How have they, how have they represented the village? How have they represented where is the chai stall? Who is sitting there? Who is standing there? How do they serve different people tea? These are very important markers to actually sort of make you understand whether it's a more authentic representation of a village or not. But then coming back to that meta point about violence on one hand or idyllic on the other, I mean, I guess art is art, but none of these are true to, the extent that they show them. I mean, I remember watching Mirzapur. And if you're in Bihar and you were to think that you could get away with abusing people the way that they show them do, you must be, you are mental,
Mirzapur, that's the show we all watch.
It's just one scene, right? I remember they're both sitting at the cycle shop and he's getting the cycle fixed, right? That guy is telling him some story. I also wanted to go to Indian Idol, but see now what I'm doing and I'm fixing your cycle. And he responds with this expletive, right?
You can swear on this show, by the way.
No, but I'm not. Okay, so he says, an abuse like this, right? Or using someone's mother, father, sister is a call to war. You can't get away by saying things like that to a stranger, like even some guy fixing a cycle.
Even if there is a caste difference?
Of course not, but... I mean, you wouldn't do it to a stranger who's fixing your cycle. You wouldn't do it to a stranger you meet on the bus who bumps into you or something like that. Of course, when it's an interpersonal relationship where it's an employer dealing with his worker, farmer dealing with his laborer, it's very different then. And yes, there would be abuse, and there would be abuse sometimes from both sides as well. But generally speaking, this sort of, you watch Patalok and everyone's going around abusing everyone, that it cannot happen. There will be a point of time till someone takes a screwdriver and stabs you in the eye for doing something like that.
See, this is what I mean, dude.
That part they got right.
Yeah, that part they got right.
That part is right. That part, I guess, is right to a certain extent. But the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of it is flippant for the sake of being flippant. It's also shock value. But again, if you to notice the more subtle things, architecture, people's dressing, the way they eat, the way they stand, the salutations they use to address one another, right? When they meet in public. What do you call a policeman? What do you call a neta? What do you call a woman? What do you call all of this changes. changes very, very strongly. How you would refer to a woman, let's say, who's, like what in Bombay we'd call auntie, right? Auntie in my building, auntie in my neighborhood. How would you call someone like that? Would you so from someone in your own caste and someone higher than you, right? What words would you use? Ji, aap, vis-a-vis someone lower caste than you. So your language would change, right? In terms of how you would address someone, and they may be elder to you, they may be doing something completely different from you, but everything changes depending on where you're positioned in that social hierarchy.
So this is all very, like, we were talking about earlier about progressive writers and this and that, and it's all very academic. But why do you think that there is this romance about villages, especially from people who live and who are maybe born and raised in cities? Why do you think there's this? Is it leftover parochialism, or is it what do you think it is?
So it could be a couple of things and a combination of all of them. One is, of course, you have a media description, right? In terms of that DDLJ, people drinking lassi and happy all the time, and everyone's really excited about the harvest season, which apparently seems to happen 12 months out of the year.
Correct. Yeah.
The other thing, of course, is the fact that
we have such fertile land. So much.
We have such fertile land that we have harvest 12 months out of the year. The other thing which I definitely there's a certain romanticism is if you were to, or if you are, let's say, a second generation or even a first generation, you've been born in the city, but your parents have deep cultural links or familial links back to a village. If you come from a position of privilege in the village, right, where you have got to experience most of the, the good side of life, you don't have to worry about if बिजली चली गई तो जनरेटर चला दो. अगर आपको शहर जाना है, हाईवे जाना है, गाड़ी ले लो, बाइक ले लो, ये कर लो, वो कर लो. There's no shortage of money. You have a phone. You have these. So you come from a certain expectation, or you come from a certain privilege of rural life where you have not had to see the negative consequences of your social position. So you are like, oh wow, this is fantastic. And then you have all these. And then I think for certain city slickers, it's just like, oh, the food tastes better, the water is so fresh, and the air is so clean. Rural India.
I think, a small addition to your second point, I think the second generation people. I think growing up in school, especially where I grew up, I knew a lot of people who spent their summer vacations in their village. Like, or where they went to
going to native.
Yeah, Nani ka gaon, Dadi ka gaon. And again, most of these people were, I think. All of these people were upper caste people, as far as I remember. And of course, your position in that village was like, top dog.
Yeah.
And so, like you described, there was no issue with money, or there was no issue with access to things. Yeah. And in the village, you got access to things, you played, and especially as a kid, you play and you get to do all sorts of things. So I think there was also that angle, which is essentially an addition to what Nikhil's second point was.
Yeah. You had a great time, no?
Yeah, you had a great 2 months, no? It's like, as a tourist, you go as a tourist, you have a great, you could go to like Russia as a tourist and have a great time.
But Nikhil, then tell me what is the opposite of that then?
The opposite of that. Could you what does that mean?
Like, for instance, like if you come from an upper caste or a privileged background, then life is obviously really good. But then what is the flip side of that? Like, for instance, if you come from a lower caste or a subaltern caste, then what is life like? Because again, you were talking about how the reality of these things is not the way they portray it in the movies and whatever. But do you have any give insights or what's it like?
So, just conceptualize this little anecdote, right? If you were to look at this very excellent web archive called People's Archive of Rural India, and I think this is something most of your listeners should also check out. It's very interesting. It's a lot of stories about rural India. The average Indian woman and child, particularly girls, like young girls, spend 8 hours a day collecting water and firewood. Right? That's 1/3 of your day that's gone in backbreaking work to collect enough energy, fuel for your cooking, and water for your drinking and your household consumption. So you are now doing this work because you do not have perhaps access to pipe drinking water. You do not have access to an LPG connection, or you can't afford it, or for various other factors. So, if you think about 1/3 of the people, or people spending 1/3 of their time just doing things like this, right? Non-income generating activities, as we like to think about it, like home, like domestic labor. So where is that? Like how do we as city people think about it? Particularly all of us who have like pipe gas connections, and you have a fridge and it's filled with chilled water all the time. Secondly, you look at ownership of assets. What is the percentage of our lower caste that actually own land, own access to productive relations, right? So do they own the land they cultivate? Do they have a full share of the produce that gets cultivated off that land? If they don't, and if they're working as daily wage, what are the wages that they get paid? If you look at our minimum wage, according to the acts, it's around 300, 400. It depends. Different states have different acts. But if you were to go to some of the states, it's actually significantly lower than that.
Correct, yeah.
And
just to be clear, this is 300 a day.
300 a day, yeah. 300 a day. So, I mean, that's nothing, right? In terms of, I go out with my friends, I have a couple of beers.
Yeah.
Okay, I probably end up spending 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 rupees. Right? 2 beers and it's done. But here is someone working 9 to 5 and manual labor. Okay, and this is one thing I've got to say when it comes to manual labor, right? So I always, and this is another way in which I would like to, which I'd romanticize this. When I first went to the Gaon, right, and I'm like, "Arey, kisan kheti kar raha hai," and of course I was in charge of a small plot of land, and we were growing vegetables for the school kitchen, right? And plowing, sowing seeds, weeding, harvesting, pruning the plants. This back-breaking, ass-breaking work. As city boys, you can't do it. You can't do it. I've seen men as old as 70, frail and skinny, lift up a quintal, like as if it's nothing. A quintal's 100 kgs. Right? And on his back, he's loading, unloading it from a truck, and he's doing it 20 times. And then you have all these, no offense, but all these guys in these gyms like doing like, I can bench press 120. And I'm like, yeah, cool, bro. Why don't you try lifting these gonis of rice, up and down a truck? If you come from that if you are subaltern, if you are lower caste, if you are Muslim, if you are even worse, women and children, because it's the worst for them, and irrespective of the caste, the class you belong to, your life is horrible. Your opportunities, your life opportunities are never going to be the same as those around you who are perhaps, let's say, richer, who are from a different caste altogether, an upper caste, or who are from the city. It's like, can a kid from Bombay and you take a kid from the villages I work in Vaishali, they can never compete, right? If they're giving their 10th standard exams, 12th standard exams, one kid has access to, Baiju, and he can go and like download anything on his 4G phone. And I have another kid whose parents are illiterate, right? And he's the first generation literate. So it's poles apart. It's heaven and hell, or whatever, heaven and earth, as you call it. It's completely opposite, where you have to understand that your life opportunities are severely diminished. Whether it's access to services, access to opportunities, access to income, or even the self-respect that you would get from the community.
Healthcare.
Of course, the healthcare, education, maternal health, even food security.
Yeah.
Right? These are aspects which, and I've worked in some villages in Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, where you would say that the level of food security is beyond, or food insecurity is beyond imaginable. And you have these visuals in Uttar Pradesh, particularly in Bihar, particularly in eastern India, and in the cow belt of people feeding, for midday meals, kids get roti and namak. Right? You tell me any Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, Calcutta, a school cafeteria serving kids roti and namak and being like, chalo, abhi chalao, tumhara buddhi, dekhta kitna marks aata hai. So it just poles apart. And unfortunately, no one, when we in the cities, when we read all of this news, we're like, oh, bichara, so sad, so bad. This government is not doing enough. This government is not doing enough. But the point being is like, then you also need to understand that, these are a lot of people who feel like this will also be like, oh, gaons are so idyllic. I would love to go live in the Gao. I would love to go sit under a tree and read a book. And I would love to, eat fresh produce from the tree. And I'm like, yeah, in all likelihood, they've probably sprayed that tree with a whole bunch of chemical pesticides and insecticides and fungicides. And you just think it's fresh, right? And even some of these very archaic, these ideas that somehow people sleep better. I mean, yeah, 60% of our people are sleeping on an empty stomach.
Mm.
Right? So you have to imagine how maybe they're sleeping because they've got, so many other worries. And it just does not make sense sometimes. It just does
No,
not.
and you also said back-breaking labor, right? So you have to sleep after that, I guess.
You have to sleep, and you really do. I mean, I couldn't do it. I would always be like, no, there's some part of me that must go in these laboring activities. And they'd see me do it for 5 minutes, and then I'm like, oh, Jesus, I need to sit down. I can't do this anymore. And they'd all laugh at me, and they were like, look at this guy. He thought he could do what we do, And I've always experienced this in a certain way. It's like when you sort of parachute in there and you're like, okay, we have a project, so we're going to stay here for 6 months. You're this, curious object where he's always going to try and show you the good things about like how he's better than you.
Hmm.
And I would really enjoy this competitive spirit sometimes. He's like, oh, look, do you have this in your city? Do you have this in your city? Do you have this? And he just showed me the good parts. But, when you are, and this is a very interesting anecdote as well. In a lot of my times, right, whenever we're doing any sort of development projects, whether that's community sanitation or drinking water schemes or education, we do these things called participatory rural appraisals, right?
Okay.
You go around with households and you're like, okay, show me the infrastructure in your village. Let me see you using it. How far is it away from your house? What sort of access do you have of it? And generally, whenever you're doing any of this survey work, you'll always end up, through some contact, you'll always end up sitting in the Mukhia's house and who'll introduce you to his cronies who are all upper caste or whatever, elite members of that community. And everyone's like, oh, things are great. Things are fantastic. Things are going really, really well.
Hmm.
And you'd always be like, okay, fine. Okay, what is your this? How much do you make? And then you're like, okay, but and as you're walking through the village and you see some houses that, look a little kacha. And you're like, I want to go there and survey. Oh, no, don't go there. Those people are not good. They don't understand Hindi. They don't do this. You have language problems. वो तो आपके काम के ही नहीं है. So even a lot of development work sometimes gets concentrated to sort of strengthen the position of these elites. Mm-hmm. And where work needs to be done for members, for Dalits, for minorities, women and children, that just gets, because you just can't access that world altogether. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the levels of disparity are that much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think also you were also mentioning the way even just the structure of a village, the physical structure of a village is set up is very distinct. Share more about that in the sense like how is the village divided in most of these places in terms of its geography?
So most villages, if you were to go to a heterogeneous village, right, and it's very interesting. You have when you think about a village, right, there's that DDLJ perspective. Everyone's living together, chilling, dancing, going to a neighbor's house to borrow chini, dahi chini, whatever. But there are, the idea of the tola in the village, right? So it's like ghettos within a village or some. So you would have the Dalits, you would have different caste groups operating different tolas, and the access of services or amenities or infrastructure in those tolas would be very different. So, for instance, the first road that gets built will be the road that goes to the upper caste house or to that locality. The first places where street lighting comes on is in those localities, right? Those are the localities that have best access to the main roads, to all of, the connecting roads. Those are also the areas of the village that are least prone to flooding, least prone to water stagnation. This is very interesting if you think about it. Like, but if you were to sort of move into the lower caste, the Dalit tolas, and then suddenly it's like, okay, wow, this road is full of overflowing sewage, right? You don't have access to sewage. There's water that sort of accumulates there in the rain. And then you look at the condition of the houses, right? Most of them, you go and you see there's a greater proportion of them that will be kacha houses. And I think like a very interesting perspective of this in media, like, we've been talking about films also, is Prakash Jha's film called Damul. It's a very old film. I think it's available on YouTube also. Prakash Jha takes you to this village in Bihar, in Motihari, where there are 3 distinct tolas. There is a Brahmin tola, a Rajput tola, and a Dalit tola.
So tola means locality, area.
Tola just means a smaller locality in a village.
Okay.
Yeah. So the way he shows you the roads, right? The way he shows you, so the upper caste tolas are wider. There's more green space. There are trees planted. It's aesthetically it looks a little better, right? People have courtyards. People are using their courtyards in a very uniform way. There will be one nice space for the tulsi plant. There will be some, aam ka ped, whatever, jo bhi, amrud ka ped. But then as you move towards the Dalit tolas, you see their fences, their boundaries are made out of bamboo and thatch. right? You see their homes, it's bamboo columns, bamboo pillars, thatch roof, right? In front, what will always be in front of the upper caste household? Bags and bags, particularly if they shoot it around a time where they're trying to demonstrate that, there's a seasonal change, harvest time. In front of the upper caste house, there's bags and bags of produce. Rice, wheat, bhusa. Bhusa is like animal fodder. You come to the Dalit houses, there'll be a smaller proportion of it. He'll have, even if you look at the sort of animals, right? An upper caste household will have he'll have some cows, he'll have some buffaloes. But as you move lower down the caste order, the animals that they own for livestock changes. A lot of them will have goats, a lot of them will have chickens. So for instance, one thing I've always noticed is that in a large number of villages, and this is across UP, Bihar, Jharkhand and Rajasthan, a lot of Dalits end up rearing pigs. Right? And pigs are not reared by any other. Like if you were to move up, they will not even consider a pig. Although they will eat pig, let's say they're all having a drink and it's some party, then yes, they will call for some meat and they will do something like that. But they will not raise a pig. Right? And this is so distinct when you would, let's say, move to like a community down in, let's say, in Karnataka or Coorg or, somewhere in Tamil Nadu, where raising a pig is a very cultural aspect. The pig is a beast that's there in your house, and when there's a wedding or when there's a big function, you'd end up slaughtering the pig and then everyone gets fed. But this idea, right, that certain animals are polluting, certain animals are clean. And I think all of these various factors go into like sort of, how you look at a locality, how you look at a house. Maybe the upper caste has a hand pump. Just that access. So it just screams affluence, relative affluence. That, okay, this person seems to be living that idyllic life. Whereas you come here and you're like, oh, wow, this person is just, I don't know what's happened to this person. It seems like some tornado has gone through this place.
And since you taught at a school, how does this play out at the school level?
So the school I taught in was a very, very progressive school, where there was a very strong emphasis on the fact that kids sit together, they eat together. They used to do a lot of different experiments by, making different kids eat out of the same bowl, right? So you share meals. And and this is something that Ambedkar talks about in Annihilation of Caste. The only two ways you can actually break down social barriers in India. One is intercaste dining. You have people sharing food, and it's a very, very strong bond. Second is intercaste marriage. We have not yet reached the second part, but the first part is very crucial to breaking down barriers. But in most other schools, and there's stories of this that come around in newspapers all the time. Kids made to sit separately, kids not allowed to use the same set of, let's say, toilet facilities or sanitation facilities that, the general or the upper caste students would have.
I also remember reading about instances of where upper caste kids refusing to eat from cooks who are Dalit.
Yeah. That is, I think this happens a lot, particularly in midday meal school programs, where they're like, no, unless the food is cooked by someone who's of the same caste or a caste that we deem comfortable with, we will not consume the food. And actually, a lot of government officials in that way, particularly district magistrates, have really been trying to undo this, this impact by actually going to those schools and eating food there. And I think this sets a very strong example. And, I've always felt that the most comfortable way of sort of like, entering a household or engaging with a household is sharing water. Like you go to someone's house, and this happens a lot when you come from an urban area to a rural space, and they know you're from the city, right? They know from the way you dressed up, you're wearing shoes, you're looking prim and proper, and offering you water, right? When that water comes with that finger dipped in the lota, do you take it or not take it? Right? Do you put your lips to the glass or no? Or do you take the lota, wash the glass first, do 10,000 things and what do you do? Right? And that goes very crucial to whether someone will be like, okay, fine, this person, drinks the water in my house. And that's a very strong way of breaking down boundaries. There are negative always. I mean, this is India. There will always be these negative stories, but there are so many great potential ways in which we can undo this social stratification. You can fight this social stratification. And this is, I'm not saying that drinking water from someone's hand is going to stop caste but it's a very, very strong message that, you can do in terms of politics of the personal, cups don't matter, your maids can use your toilets, your maids can use the same plates in your house. These are very, very strong ways in which you can actually break down some of these
And also,
barriers.
I think you've been around these parts for 10 years at least, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think you've also sort of essentially been around these parts at a very interesting point of time where mobile telephony has sort of just blown up from 2G to 3G to 4G.
Yeah.
And what is it doing to these parts, at least from whatever you've seen?
So I'll tell you some of the good parts. The good parts are, of course, you have greater information, better communication. There's a digital access to, particularly for things like financial inclusion, extremely, extremely important. Also, information, greater connectivity with the outside world is very, very crucial to, helping people expand their worldviews. Then some of the negative parts, but these I would say are not necessarily, as a causality of the technology. One, of course, definitely, and I mean, this is something that we're all concerned about, is the rise in terms of fake news, right? And I don't think, technology has just exacerbated this problem, right? Something emerges there, and, I'm on some of these WhatsApp groups with a lot of the farmers. This is beyond good morning, good evening, all sorts of messages get sent, right? I just witnessed this accident. Here, watch this video. I just saw this really gruesome thing. I just saw this big snake eat something. Here, watch this video. Just the thorough stuff that gets sent there.
Group must be something else only.
It is. It is something.
Watch this Netflix thing. Here, watch this YouTube video and all that.
No, these are people actually shooting videos, right? And I don't know why there's this great fixation with accident videos for some reason in India. Gore, our love of gore is just beyond. I think maybe it's because it's so common, so prevalent.
You see it all the time, right? You just see it.
Yeah. You're like, okay, fine. Yeah, you also see this, in case you missed it.
Yeah.
Some of the more negative, particularly, and this is in terms of a lot of my work, particularly with farmers, sons and daughters, youth who necessarily don't want to farm. And this is something that we've been noticing, right? A lot of them, YouTube all the time, TikTok, watching videos. And it's a little hypocritical for me to also say this, right? That, they should be using this time to watch educational content. Right. But I'm also goofing around all the time, looking at funny memes and cat videos. So there is that, in a sense, is that this, I guess maybe there's so much content also that they just, a lot of the workers that we work with, a lot of my staff members also who work with me on projects, every night there's some movie they're using Share It or one of those earlier apps that the government of India banned. You just watch movies all the time. And it's fine. And I think that's actually good, is because it shows you there is this outside world, and it just opens your mind up a little bit. And I think those are good. Those aren't particularly bad. My biggest thing I would say is fake news, and the ability of that rumors to spread. Yeah. But the good part is not everyone thinks that all these movies, I think sometimes we also think that people in villages are idiots, which is absolute, it's just parochial, haha, arey, tum log to ye sab kar rahe ho.
And especially if you considering over the last 50 years, you'll see the voting patterns, you'll realize that they're not idiots at all.
They're not. They're very smart. There are ways in which their idioms of politics are far more refined. I think, but there are lots of issues about that. But in terms of who they choose as representatives, why they vote for certain people, how do they collectivize around certain movements, right? And
actually, Nikhil, that's a question that I wanted to ask opinion on. So, if you follow politics, the way politics is being reported in this country right now, especially in English language media, etc., there's this talk about how there is Bharat and how there is India. Okay, where India is this idea of a westernized, slightly secular or progressive parts of the country, like the big cities or whatever, and then there's the real India, which is Bharat. Okay, and so it seems like there's a bit of a break over here, considering that you have politicians who, on the one hand, say that Bharat is the real India. Okay, and then you have people like us who sit in the cities, who consume or who are part of the urban media, who buy into that narrative, that there is a big difference. Is there one though?
So, there are two ways of thinking about this. One, of course, the Bharat and the India sort of, contradiction is posited in terms of it's very strong in terms of as a political ideology. Right? And it's a very good way, particularly for parties, politicians, ideologies, that are rural entrenched, that are rural based to make this argument, right? And throughout the 70s, 80s, when we had very, very strong farmers movements in India, and that is something that has declined in the past 2 decades. But the farmers' movements were essentially the ones who would bring up this argument that there is the Bharat, and it was largely a reflection of this whole terms of trade. Bharat gets nothing. Agriculture produces everything for the country. Rural produces everything but gets nothing. Right? The cities get all the facilities and things like that. But when it comes to, do I think there is this Bharat in India? Yes, there is. There is. But it's not in terms of how I understand, like, it's not an amorphous category. I mean, the Bharat India could be like, Palghar and Mumbai. Right? Palghar is really Bharat in a sense, because you have a district that is just outside Mumbai that has one of the highest number of malnutrition deaths. A district that has the highest number of malnutrition deaths in the entire country. Right? And that is just, whatever the next district, the northernmost district of, from outside Bombay. And away from the financial capital and all those other sort of adjectives that we like to use for Bombay. So there is a difference in infrastructure, right? Hard infrastructure, governance, soft infrastructure, there is a difference. There is also a difference of ideologies. But this again is very regional, state-wise, moves from place to place, which is that, life in a city is different. Life in a rural area is very, very different. The way their conceptions of time are different. Their conceptions of money, the conceptions of what it takes for me to survive and wake up tomorrow is very, very different from the way the way Bharat thinks and the way India, the way you described it, thinks. Of course, a lot of people living in urban India also are largely working class people who have the same aspirations of Bharat. They're also worried about khana kab aayega, where can I sleep, will the policeman come and will the BMC come and break down my shanty? These are genuine concerns. And in that way, I would say it's there are some parallels in terms of this class dynamic, but yes, there is a Bharat. And I think not just a political ideology, but as a lived experience, there is a Bharat. And these Bharats are very, very different. A Bharat in Maharashtra and rural Maharashtra is very different from a rural Bihar. It's very different from a rural Punjab. It's very different from rural Tamil Nadu. And it's very different from a rural Assam. Right? All of these places have their own specificities. But yes, there is a Bharat. There is an area of India that is underdeveloped, that suffers from chronic maladministration by the government, that suffers from some of the most chronic forms of exploitation and undisturbed, like, let's say, challenges to local dominance. Right? And this is a lived reality for Bharat.
What about other aspects of your lived reality? Like, for instance, leisure or relationships. You must have seen those aspects of life as well, right?
Yeah.
It has just occurred to me that I am running the risk of sounding like we're talking about another culture entirely, right? Is it sounding like that?
No, it is, right? It is.
In a way, it is.
Yeah.
But, of course, people listening in may be like, okay, yeah, these guys are full of crap. But for a lot of other listeners, be like, I think like Joel only.
The thing is, Joel and I think, still have had experience of sort of a semi-rural, semi-urban situation.
Yeah.
A lot of people we know haven't had that.
Oh, I am definitely not. I am definitely, like, most of the time I'm shit-talking villages, to be fair. Most of the time I'm shit-talking villages. Like, fuck that, I'm not going there ever. Yeah, but like Nikhil, like we were saying, no, as far as leisure or relationships and things like that, what are the experiences like over there?
So, the way, I think there's a fundamental difference in terms of the way we understand leisure and the way, let's say, someone, how that Bharat would understand leisure, right? A worker, a laborer, a farmer, women, children, how they would understand leisure. For us, leisure would be, I need time to unwind. I've worked so hard. I need to rest my mind. I need to do it. But for them, it's largely, or rather anyone who does physical labor, I need to rest my body. I need to really detox. I'm tired to the bone. Whereas for us, it's like, I've worked my cerebral muscles and now I just need to chill out. This idea of chilling, right? For a lot of people, so leisure would be like, sleep. Sleep is leisure. For us, leisure is an activity, is a hobby. I garden, I do yoga, I take photographs, I watch Netflix, I do video chats with my friends, I record podcasts, for instance. These could be activities you do in leisure, but for them it would be sleep.
Don't throw shade, dude.
Sorry.
You're a guest on the show. Sorry, you were saying.
Let's say another activity like drinking. I think now drinking, though, is a fairly leisure activity. And I mean, some of the stuff I drink myself. I do enjoy liquor, but from an outward facing stance, I will always make the position that drinking alcohol is bad. And drinking alcohol is bad is because we do not have responsible drinking cultures. We have not been able to teach a lot of people how to drink responsibly. You know, this is just this concept of like drinking responsibly is for us like, okay, don't drink and drive. Don't drink too many drinks so you make a mess of yourself. But for a lot of people in India, rural India, urban India, like, who come from a lower class, who have, who are materially challenged in life, for them, drinking is one of the respites of life. And then there's no boundary between when it moves away from leisure and becomes detrimental to your life, to your family, to your income, to your opportunities in life. So like, I remember the first time I drank in Rajasthan with some of my, there was a team that worked there and we managed to make friends. Right. And of course, I'm from Bombay and I was in Xavier. So shout out to Sunlight Bar. We used to go drink there. And, so there's the idea that, okay, you ordered a quarter and you drank and, everyone poured drinks and you cheersed and, you had a first couple of sips and then you spoke, right? Drinking was a chance to talk. But when I went there and we were drinking, and of course, so meat and drinks have to coincide. There's no point in drinking if you're going to be eating veg food. Okay? So we're all drinking. There's a bottle of mahua. This is the first time I'm drinking mahua. There's a bottle of mahua and there's one little chai ka glass. And everyone's just doing shots, right? Opens a bottle, pours a 60 and just chugging them. And in 8 minutes, 2 bottles of mahua have been drunk by 4 people. And I'm just like, yeah, wait, I didn't even get a chance to like, talk about my day or, tell you how I'm feeling. And in like, we get to like 20 minutes and someone's cooking the food and then I'm realizing that, oh, holy shit, I'm drunk. I didn't go from like, okay, 1 drink, 2 drink. I'm drunk. And that purpose of drinking, why are you drinking? You're drinking because you have 45 minutes or 1 hour or 2 hours to get drunk as fast as you can. And drinking is escape. You want to escape because your life sucks. And it's going to be horrible for me to say this, but it's true for a lot of people. And it's one of the ways in which they're like, okay, this is what we do. And I was trying to tell them like, oh, no, let's make drinks, pour some water, talk about these. Let's talk about how's your day or, what your aspirations in life are. And they're like, no, I don't have time for this. I want to get from 0 to 100 in like 10 minutes. So screw your talking and all, you do that later. And it was and I'm like, okay, shots. Okay, yeah, sure, fine. And drunk. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
No, but before we end, there's one thing that I've always been sort of conflicted and confused about. So, we have a lot of urban Indians moving back to the villages to start farms or what, or this and that. Especially the individual farms. Like we have some of our friends who are doing that or who have
permaculture farming and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
They're obviously going there and connecting with the local population, which by and large, they're connecting with the upper caste, from whatever I can gather. How much do you think are they sort of helping maintain those structures even more, in the sense more and more people going in there and sort of just falling into that same structure again?
Well, even I have a couple of friends who are doing this. And I can only speak from the experience of them doing that. Is even of these people who've gone back and, they're like, okay, I want to get back to nature, do my own farm. Some of them, yes, are making genuine attempts to try and ingrain themselves into that culture or into that political economy and try and figure out, okay, ways in which they can improve things, take classes for the kids, provide access to water, things like that. They are trying to do it. But I notice a lot of them also sort of acting in this very isolated way. I go there, I set up a farm, I put up 8-foot tall boundaries, and whatever I do inside, I do inside. I don't have to go outside for anything. I have a borewell, I have water, I have energy, I grow my own food, or I just go drive once in a week. I drive to the nearest market, stock up food and essential supplies, whatever I need, and I come back. And even managing the farm, or like if I have a farm, I have someone who does that for me. Right? I have a thekedar, or I have some guy, a master who manages everything. So it's like I want that best life, but without necessarily engaging with all aspects of it.
You've gone like a new age landowner again.
Yeah. I don't think the landowners have ever changed in their perceptions of things. It's always that I want to get my work done with the least hassle, and as quickly as possible, and as cheap as possible. Yeah.
So, I think that pretty much sums up a fair amount of what we wanted to look at. Joel, are there any other points you'd like to cover?
Would you settle in a village?
Yes, I would. I would. Yeah. Particularly where I've been working so far, it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, and I've become quite an evangelist for Bihar right now. I'm always telling a lot of my friends, colleagues, to come to Bihar, to see it, to spend some time there. And I mean, even my parents, and they were all like, "Oh, you're going to live in Bihar, and it's like one Prakash Jha movie, and you're going to get kidnapped." But no, it's not. It's
Bihar is like our idea of Badlands, no?
But
Bihar is our idea of Tombstone.
Any place can be that. I mean, I've seen more death happening in Bombay than in any other place I've ever been
That's
to.
true.
I've seen way more
if we've ever taken the local trains in Bombay.
I know, it's not funny. It's just
no, it's not. I'm laughing out of sheer uncomfortable.
Joel, would you ever settle in a village?
No, I would never.
Yeah, same enough. Never.
I would never.
The reason I would settle in a village though is because I do feel that I would like to grow my own food. I would like to grow my own food. I would like to, develop ideally a completely DRE, like a distributed renewable energy, completely green sort of enterprise where we could look at, small scale do-it-yourself innovations for farmers to come on board to improve, yields, incomes, particularly focusing also on livelihood activities. I think only income is the way out of this. Income and control of productive assets. If that's land, if that's machinery, if that's poultry, if that's anything that can generate income from you, if you own the means to it. And ideally, I would like to set up something like this.
As someone who's advising the farm collective and stuff like that, and I'm assuming you've also set up some of your stuff there.
Yeah.
So, how hard is it to, when you're involved in certain things, you're obviously seeing things happening around you over there. Some of them may not be very pleasing. How do you how do you keep doing what you do while also trying to make a difference, but also making sure that you don't piss off too many people that it could backfire?
Also, as a corollary to this question, like what Tushar was saying, unpleasantness and all, is it easier? It's not like cities are utopia either, right? Our cities are shit too. But is it easier to tune out in a city compared to in a non-city? What do you think?
I think I'll get to Tushar's question first. There have been times where I've been witness to, domestic violence. I've been witness to, a lot of caste violence as well. Landowners beating up their laborers or not paying them, abusing them. And I've always tried to intervene in a way of like, acha, band karo. Band karo. Like any bystander would do. And, but I think, that's a major challenge in terms of, and not just me, in terms of every, development practitioner who's going to a rural space, even if people are going, or whatever, even if you're in the city, how do you resolve conflict, right? When you have no locus standi, you do not come from a position of power, right? Yeah, of course, I do know that I have, in certain places where we have projects, where I have spent years building up connections and personal networks with some of the people we work with, I know there that, yes, my word, my voice has some amount of, power behind it. I can say like, okay, don't do that. You have to pay someone a certain way, or you have to treat someone a certain way. Yes, that holds certain meaning. Because these are communities I have worked very hard to try and sort of come across as, a friend and ally. But nothing beyond that. I'm not one of them. They are very And in very no uncertain terms, they've always made me aware of that I'm not them. And even I believe that I can never be them, right? But there is I would say it's always a challenge. When you see something very gruesome happening in front of you, when you see something that you know is inherently wrong, how do you react?
Yeah.
My thing is always, again, band karo. Sometimes it's not enough. And it's continued to take place.
Yeah.
And I think that's a major, it's a real challenge.
Conflict of the greater good for you, right? Like in the sense like, wait, I've tried this, but if I go to the next level, that this project that I'm doing that could benefit 50 other people.
No, definitely, sure. There's that. There's that. But, so one thing that a lot of development organizations, including us, what we try and do is rather than, or in any intervention program, is you look at the most bottom of the pyramid. You start there, right? In a rural area, if you are planning a farm intervention, a sanitation intervention, an energy intervention, you look at the most bottom of the pyramid. You look at people that are most vulnerable, you look at people, and you look at ways in which that can be strengthened. Their resilience can be strengthened.
Even in that scenario, you ever face a certain resistance from the upper caste? That why have you come here and why are you helping them?
Sometimes, yes. But it's not always it's not always very in your face.
Okay.
And as I said, right, if you just parachute into there and you're like, okay, I want to go to this household and I want to go talk to them. Of course, I'll talk to you all as well, but I would also like to go speak with them. He's not going to prevent you. He's not going to say like, oh, don't do this, don't do that. And, because he doesn't want to badlight or badmouth his own village in front of you. He doesn't want to, it's that whole white people saying, I'm not racist. Or upper caste people saying, I'm not casteist. You don't want to betray that. You don't want to betray that to someone else who's a stranger. Of course, when that stranger leaves, I have no way of controlling or I have no way of sometimes even knowing what's going to happen after I leave. Right? So, yeah, it's, outright none, but yes, very implicit. Sir ji, abhi bas ho gaya aapka, thoda dur rahiye. That happens, yeah.
Oh, man.
And, abhi, and, in terms of Joel's question about tuning in, what is tuning in this context?
No, tuning out. I mean, tuning out.
Tuning out.
Huh.
I don't think that you can tune out. You can't be like, oh, it's a Gaon, I'm going to tune out, or it's a city, I'm going to tune out. It's not. If you're tuned in, you're tuned in. If you see something bad happening, you're going to. And if you are the sort of person who's going to say something about it or do something about it, then you are that sort of person.
No, but it's like that experience, right? When all of us have traveled by train, we've seen dead bodies. And then I think after the first or second shock, after that, you just don't even doesn't even register after a point.
But there have been certain things that have really I would say that have really messed me up. Someone I knew lost a kid, and this, of course, and you read statistics. It's like even right now with Corona, you're reading statistics, but then the moment it happens to someone close to you, you're like, oh shit, this disease has come here, right? Is when I knew someone used to teach in the same school as I did, and when they lost their kid who was 2 years old, and it was a slight fever that went to some stomach issues, and the kid died before they could get it to the hospital. Right? And that's because they took it to the primary health. They took the child to the primary healthcare center. They were like, "Oh, idhar ilaj nahi ho sakta. Aapko Kota jana padega." To arrange a vehicle, take them to Kota. That's 6 hours away. 6 hours away, right? And then and then the child dies. And it's like And then I'm thinking if this is Delhi or Bombay, there's a hospital every 3 kilometers. I could take the kid there, or some of the people on my farm in Bihar who work with us have been bitten by snakes. But our nearest, we've got 2 hospitals that can deal with snake bites. One is in Muzaffarpur city, which is about 80 kilometers away. The other one's in Patna, which is 90 kilometers away from the farm. Right? And we have all 4 of the big 4 snakes in India. That's the viper, the Russell's viper, the crate, and a cobra. We've got all 4 in the farm. This generally happens when paddy's being harvested. A snake bite, right? And with the cobra, you can't save someone, right? Unless you have the means to get a car, immediately go, do this. There's some things that really shock you. one of my experiences in Mathura working there where for the first time I saw manual scavenging. Manual scavenging of the sort, not people entering a manhole, which I've seen in Bombay and even in Delhi. But this was someone who actually cleaned out night soil, put it on her head, went away, and then came back with another thali, and she would get paid, this lady would get paid in roti, not even money. So just it's food for doing this work. Right? And that sort of stuff really like, and you're there and you're like, you're just trying to fathom how someone's existence could have been made so wretched, right? That that nothing in your power, in anyone's power, can do anything about it, right? Is that how do you change this centuries, millennia of discrimination, of inherent, like just deep-rooted, अरे ये लोग तो वैसे ही है. How do you overcome that? And you realize that's when sometimes it's like, whether it's a political system, whether it's like, giving gram panchayats more power, it's all, or even, development professionals coming in, doing these interventions and, access to energy, water, livelihood. It just falls apart, right? When you see something like this happen. And this was in 2017. This is 3 years ago. It's not like, okay, this is something I saw in 2008 or 9. This is 2017.
Villages, Nikhil.
They don't.
Summing up Nikhil's like heartfelt tales with like religious guys.
Religious. It's.
I mean, just to sum it all up, I think, urban media, urban elites who look at a gaon and go like, "Bahut pyara hai, bahut sundar hai." Yeah, completely like, missing the bus.
Yeah.
But, unless we are able to galvanize 60% of our population that's living in these conditions, that's, with constant, overt, inequality, right? And unless we are somehow able to ensure a modicum, a basic level of services, assets, and governance structures, unless we are able to do that, right? You have like 60% of our country that will constantly suffer, right? And I think we need more people, to go to villages. And there are, for any listeners, if they're young, there are many, many fellowships that you can do after your undergrad, your postgrad, to go work. There are also different states have chief ministers, research fellowships, development fellowships for youngsters to actually go and do positive development work with some of India's most vulnerable communities. And you have a chance here to experience that life and to sort of, let go of certain stereotypes and sort of look at ways in which we can solution for some of our problems. And this is particularly for people who are young. Of course, if you're above 30, 40, I wouldn't expect you to do this. But if you're above that age, I just tell you to get off your high horse and maybe, talk to more people. But yeah, for a lot of, if there are some young listeners out there, definitely consider rural fellowships. I did one, and that's led me on to this career path, and it's led me on to this line of work. And I've never regretted it. I've always felt that this has been something that has given me so much more. I've so much, like, these rich experiences, meeting the most fascinating people that I could never even have imagined, right? And having some of the most like enriching experiences of my life where I've put myself, my personality, my body on the line, and I've overcome these challenges. And I think definitely, if you are in that frame of mind and if you think you're considering this, please go there. It's fantastic, but go there only after all this coronavirus is over. Don't go and take your city germs to all these rural areas. Yeah, go after Corona gets finished.
Just when I thought we could end on a positive note, you had to ruin it with Corona.
That's going to be the benchmark now for all our lives now. It's like, before Corona, I was successful and I had hair. Now I'm bald. No offense to all the follically challenged people on this podcast. I have feels. I understand your pain.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums up everything that we wanted to discuss today.
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us and for sort of sharing all your experiences. Joel, how would you sum up this whole thing?
I know. Ditto what Nikhil said, yeah. I know I was making jokes about like villages suck and this and that, but having been in one, having spent some time in one growing up, I know there's far more to it than just like, it's not a cesspool of ignorance. And at the same time, it's also not
Paradise.
Paradise.
It's somewhere in between, like all things. So before we go, I'd just like to say, if you like the podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IBM network. You can listen to us on the IBM Podcast app or ibmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are IBM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, I am Tushar_Abhi on Instagram and Yon OK Please on Twitter. Nikhil, you are?
I actually don't know my Twitter ID. I'm very old school in that way.
But you're primarily on Instagram, right?
I'm on Instagram as Nikhil Govius, and I will just tell you my Twitter ID right now. No. I generally tend to retweet a lot of like agri news. No. I'm Govius Nikhil on Twitter.
Govius Nikhil. Joel, you are?
I am Pereira Joel on Twitter and joelpereira.esq on Instagram.
All right, that's it from us, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on board, guys.
Thanks, Nikhil.
Pleasure talking to you.
Hi guys, this is Ayushi.
And I am Ritasha.
And welcome to Agla Station Adulthood.
It's a fun podcast we've got going on, and we'd love for you to tune in and enjoy with us.
Join us as we stop at various stations and discuss different topics that seem to be bothering us and hopefully
dating,
you as well.
Relationships, beauty, just being an adult, lots of different things.
We don't have a great grip on it, but we've done okay so far.
Catch Agla Station Adulthood every Thursday on the IVM app, the IVM website, or wherever else you get your podcasts.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.